I'm Lori McCulley, and I head our Treasury Technology practice. I'm joined today by my colleagues Jeff DiOrio and Elaine Filas, principals in our Treasury Technology practice. Today, as with every quarter, we'll bring you our perspective on the ecosystem of technology that enables Treasury visibility and analytics for the management of cash, trade, and risk worldwide. Having just come from several conferences, we will relate our findings and conclusions with respect to the conversations we had with corporate attendees and solution vendors. We're also incorporating feedback from our first tech briefing. We heard from several attendees, and we folded that in. A few logistics before we start. We will end in 30 minutes. We welcome questions following the webcast, but we'll reply off the air to keep the session on time. For all participants, we'll send the presentation and offer a recording of it on our website. In each of our quarterly briefings, we follow the same sections. We cover what we believe to be the most important things our clients need to know as they address their technology needs. That starts with our take on the big issues in the Treasury technology space today, along with what we're hearing from our clients in our work with respect to trends. Then we'll report what clients are saying about the tools they are choosing, why specific systems were selected, and how satisfied those companies are with their solutions. In our discussion of game changers today, we'll take a closer look at big data. In our section on the journey to Treasury 3.0, we'll discuss the choices corporates confront as they relate their system choice and progress on the road to establishing Treasury as a financial nerve center. Finally, we want to relate client experiences that illustrate how Treasury technology projects can achieve objectives. So we'll talk specifically today about how a solid design will result in a more strategic Treasury. Jeff will now provide our take on the current industry happenings and relate what's going on in the market right now.
Thank you, Lori. We set out this list of hot issues in the Treasury technology industry in our first briefing 3 months ago. The landscape is characterized by 1, consolidation, 2, convergence, 3, big data, and 4, regulation. Today, we'll touch briefly on consolidation, convergence, and regulatory change with a more in-depth discussion on big data. As we mentioned last quarter, there's a consolidation in the legacy providers of Treasury management systems, with Wall Street Systems buying IT2 earlier this year. Just recently, Ion Trading, which owns Wall Street, purchased Triple Point Technologies, a specialty commodity and risk system. Both SunGard and Wall Street continue to build a portfolio of several TMS solutions. At the same time, new vendors are seeing opportunity in the Treasury technology market, with OpenLink, Financial Sciences, Treasury Curve, and market data providers coming to market with cash and risk management systems. Financial risk management solutions have been flourishing over the last 2 years, from the likes of Chatham Financial, Hedge Trackers, FinCAD, SuperDerivatives, and others. Banks are continuing to add cash management functionality to their web platforms, and stay tuned for other new providers in the Treasury technology space. Having just attended the SAP conference, we clearly see that ERP providers like SAP are focusing on functional enhancements of their Treasury modules to include more intuitive cash management and KPI reporting, as well as capabilities in the market and risk analyzer modules. SAP is also rolling out a financial services network for integrated connectivity between its clients and banks. Convergence is happening in both functional and technical realms. Last week, we saw more mobile apps being rolled out. From bank EBAM solutions to dashboard reporting with best practice metrics. So the convergence of desktop offerings with mobile is happening at a furious pace. Technically, companies are converging their previously installed applications in the cloud, something that should continue, and part of the reason big data is getting so much press. We were at 2 Treasury conferences last week, and one of the themes was about how big data creates opportunities. We will be examining big data today to a greater degree. Not only what it is, but how companies, and especially Treasury, can use it. On the regulatory front, our clients are grappling with several key initiatives. 1, European market infrastructure regulation and Dodd-Frank on derivatives. This is clearly in the early stages of implementation, and some solution vendors have added AMIR and Dodd-Frank reporting features, as well as the ability to capture swap execution facility usage. 2, SEPA. Most of our clients are well underway with their SEPA compliance initiatives. Reformatting payment files for direct debit and credit payment methods. However, there are many corporations who have not yet completed it and may miss the February 2014 deadline. There is some talk of an extension to the deadline for direct debits. Expect an announcement over the next couple of months on this. 3, FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Most clients are concluding that FATCA compliance primarily applies to either their banks or for individual holders of foreign accounts. But clients are asking us to help ensure that they have everything they need to know on this regulation. 4, money market funds. Comments on floating net asset value for money market funds are still being assessed by the SEC. Some solution providers accommodate tracking money market funds as a securities issue. 5, Basel III. Our bank clients are furiously trying to get the data needed to comply with Basel III. With parallel run and tracking occurring on some measures, we also want to take into account what our clients are saying about a number of different subjects as they relate to technology. In light of the growing adoption of ERP systems, rapid rise of hosted and SaaS Treasury solutions, plus turmoil in the vendor space, we were curious to take a pulse on what systems people are selecting now, the primary reasons for the choices, and ultimately how satisfied treasurers are with their Treasury technology. Our first survey question asked respondents to name the primary technology tool used for Treasury operations, including cash and risk management. Lori, does this differ much from the surveys we conducted on this subject 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, on the surface, it may appear not. There are definite new trends here. The first is that more clients are choosing hosted or SaaS solutions. This was a fraction of answers 10 years ago and has grown tremendously. The second trend is that the ERP share of the pie has definitely gotten larger. Are you surprised by anything here?
Yes, Lori. I would have thought that TMS would have had a greater percentage of users than 38%, but Excel continues to exist in a wide variety of organizations for both cash and risk. I think also that the online bank platform usage as a primary tool can mean that users are adopting the new cash management features available from some banks. TMS light, so to speak.
So the bottom line is there's no dominant choice among Treasury for their ideal system, and chances are there are multiple tools being deployed in every Treasury.
We also wanted to investigate why people chose the platforms they did. Each respondent selected 2 primary reasons.
What a contrast here. IT is clearly a driver for choosing SAP or Oracle Treasury, for example. But when the Treasury project can fall under the IT budget, that makes sense. What do you make of the functionality answers, Jeff?
Well, Lori, while it may not be surprising that TMS platforms are selected because of their functional fit, the ERP Treasury offerings are a higher functional match than people would have said 5 years ago. And not just for the integration internally. Look at the bank integration responses.
Yes. Building on our client comments last quarter about Excel as too cumbersome, people obviously like the price point and zero implementation time of Excel. Although maybe we should have given them the option of replying to the alternative of maintenance for Excel spreadsheets. I think we might have gotten a different answer there.
Our third question dealt with whether corporate treasurers feel as if their technology does what they want it to do. Some interesting developments here.
A range of relative mediocrity in some cases. Jeff, do you think this means that people just feel like they shouldn't expect to get everything they wanted? Or does it represent true shortcomings in implementation or perhaps product functionality?
I think it's probably some of both, Lori. But it mirrors what we see when we're called upon to evaluate client environments for what needs to be fixed. Dissatisfaction with legacy systems can often be because there was no vision or design when it was implemented. This is something we'll be examining shortly.
Yes, you can't expect to get a system that achieves objectives if there's little thought put into design. I have to say it's worth noting that hosted or SaaS solution users are among the most satisfied, probably due to lower IT burden associated with that kind of deployment. Anything else strike you, Jeff?
Look at the relatively satisfied ERP Treasury module group. I think integration has a lot to do with it, as does the improvement in functionality.
Turning to one of the big issues, we'll discuss technology and big data. While big data gets a lot of publicity, many of our clients want to know exactly what it means. One of the simplest definitions I've seen is that it involves new analytic applications based on types of data consolidated in one place and not previously being tracked. Could be social media, mobile data, or just existing data that's, because it's so siloed in an organization, it goes unused. Big data has three primary characteristics: high volume, high frequency, and high variety. All of it is predicated on either a single database or moving those databases and applications to the cloud. If it's all in one place, of course, the higher frequency can then become real-time and orchestrate a move from forecasting to nowcasting. All of this is in an attempt to expose variances and spot patterns. Big data is the next extension of applications moving to the cloud. Companies really want to stop manual data migrations and mapping directory paths, consolidate it all in one place. If we look at big data visually, the size of data is exploding and the variety keeps changing. From basic purchase detail transaction that is recorded in an ERP and CRM system that has information about the customer, you can then move to data interactions on the web with that same customer that can then result in dynamic pricing, weblogs, search marketing. From there, it's a leap to social media interaction, external demographics, and video images adding to the pile of data. There is a reason the term data mining comes to mind if you picture this as a mountain of data to climb or even mine. Maybe it's a treasure trove. So what does it mean for you in Treasury? Three Treasury uses for big data come to mind immediately. Better cash forecasting is number one. Using data from particular types of cash flows, customer segments, geographies. This brings variance analysis to a whole new dimension. More detailed FX exposure reporting and analytics. Most companies struggle with accuracy, but sometimes our clients find exposures are simply not reported. With big data, additional data sets can quickly identify previously unreported exposures and result in better Treasury control over hedging decisions. Third, the ability to run analytics on variance for liquidity or FX positions. This is really where Treasury turns strategic, and we're eagerly awaiting client adoption of big data initiatives to see how it can take Treasury closer to 3.0. The next section of today's briefing is designed to show how we're helping our clients think about how to get to Treasury 3.0. This chart that we introduced in our first technology webinar is the baseline for thinking about how choices Treasury makes for technology will advance them toward a more strategic Treasury and enable the financial nerve center. Today, we've talked about the prevalence of a variety of primary Treasury technology tools. Certainly, Excel sits at the base level for Treasuries and doesn't constitute enhanced infrastructure. Bank web platforms, while they're very functional and accessible, they don't really represent a broad architecture choice, and they haven't integrated cash and risk to the degree that TMS and ERP platforms have. We'd argue that SaaS TMS offerings constitute an improvement on the infrastructure side from the standpoint of a lighter footprint. And they certainly accommodate Treasuries getting involved in more and more activities. Some vendors are expanding along the CFO financial chain of command into procure-to-pay, supply chain, and order-to-cash functionality, which leaves us with ERPs. We believe that the integration benefits define enhanced infrastructure, and the functional scope is coming up quickly. But the integration benefits are unlikely to be realized if the ERP is not designed to meet Treasury's strategic objectives. Our final section of quarterly tech briefings is one in which we'll relate success stories about what can be painful and long projects, Treasury technology implementations. Jeff and Elaine will cover a recent situation where we helped our client get across the finish line, this time with a vision of objectives and what the client's Treasury system should do, and then turning it into a reality with good design.
Thank you, Lori. Elaine, can you share with us a recent client example where we're helping them implement Treasury technology and for whom design was a key part of the process?
Certainly, Jeff. Yeah, we worked with a client in the insurance industry recently to implement Treasury technology. They were transitioning, like many people, from an Excel-based environment. They did have some legacy proprietary systems for certain functions, and then had a series of host-to-host bank connections, as well as a very high volume of payments in Treasury. While they had very general objectives to automate their processes and transition to SWIFT for streamlined bank connectivity, they needed help translating those goals into an overall vision and then a blueprint for their Treasury system.
Elaine, can you help us understand the difference between vision and blueprint?
Sure. Too many times, we find that people want to just go straight to configuring the new system. But, you wouldn't start building a house without a vision of whether it's going to be a cottage or a castle. A vision for a Treasury system should speak to what specific problems it will solve, the opportunities it will create, and what growth you need it to accommodate. For this customer, we helped articulate the infrastructure should support a high volume of transactions as seamlessly as possible, enable 100% visibility to liquidity, and improve controls. This organization was also in an acquisition mode, and supporting that future growth was critical. Then, just like when you build a house, you want to be sure the blueprint or the design incorporates a solid foundation, all of the features and security you envision, and that it will fit within the footprint of the lot, and also allow for future growth. So when we helped the customer design their new platform, it really meant going through a very well-defined process.
Interesting. What does the process look like, Elaine?
Well, it incorporates 4 primary elements that we advocate addressing in a specific design workshop. And I will say this workshop can last, 3 to 5 days or more, depending on the scope of the Treasury operation. The first piece involves gathering the key business requirements and confirming them with all the stakeholders. What's in scope and what's out of scope. This insurance client was encouraged to gather representatives from all the departments that touch or are touched by a given function. And this can include accounting, IT, audit, and sometimes AR and AP. You certainly don't want to hear later that certain key parties' needs were not met, particularly when they did not have a say in the design. The next step, step 2, is to examine the current state workflows and what needs to change. Then figure out how those processes will change in the new system, what controls need to be added, and what manual processes can be automated. In the case of this customer, we revised the workflows and created subsequent future state workflows, depicting the roles, the specific activities that needed to be performed, specifically calling out controls, and then all of the interfaces that needed to be part of a process. And in this case, actually, this kind of documentation also pleased the internal audit group, gave them much more comfort with the implementation process. Another key component, the third, is interfaces, the integration between the TMS and other key internal data sources as well as external data sources. In this case, the client's key points of data integration were with its banks and the ERP to support cash positioning and forecasting, as well as payments and then accounting. This client elected bank information reporting via SWIFT to replace their multiple, numerous, I would say, bank connections. Design, really gets at what you need to source data-wise, along with the specifications of the pieces of data that need to be included. That you have to figure out the frequency of the interface and the schedule for those imports or exports, and how that information will be mapped into and used by the system. These sources almost always include banks, but then there can also be market rate providers, trading platforms for money market funds, confirmation services, trade confirmation services, and separate risk management systems, to name just a few. Finally, it's important to assess your reporting requirements, particularly the reporting that goes to senior management or to groups outside Treasury. Significant improvements for these groups can get you a lot of good press internally, as it did for this client. Reporting can be a critical reason why an implementation project is considered either a wild success or a non-event. So we advised this client to really focus on identifying what they needed for critical reports that were produced in the old world, as well as ways to improve the flow of information inside and outside Treasury in the new world. We started with identifying the reports that were no longer needed, and I'm using air quotes, little finger air quotes here, because because these reports went to Treasury staff who also had access to the system. So in those cases, the paper information transfer was no longer necessary. One client a while ago counted 123 reports when we started the process. But by the time they eliminated the unnecessary ones, we were left with only 37. With the remaining reports, we reviewed the standard reports that the system offered and matched those critical reports with the system reports to see where the gaps were. And in most cases, some tweaking of those standard reports was required. But, the requirement could be met mostly with those standard reports. Then there are always the key reports that will require custom development. And you really need to be thorough about defining what needs to be incorporated into those reports, how they'll be distributed, et cetera. So in summary, develop and then socialize the business requirements, design the future state workflows and controls, identify all the interfaces, and then define your reporting requirements.
Thank you, Elaine. This sounds like it takes a long time, does it?
Well, it can take a while, Jeff, but it's a really critical part of the process. And it's something that can be started as early as during the selection process, the vendor selection process. You really need strong documentation of your business requirements to support a comprehensive RFP. And you can begin your analysis of the current state workflows and the design of the future state as well. Certainly this may have to be tweaked once a specific vendor is selected, but you'll still be well ahead of the game when the implementation starts. In the end, rushing to build the house means the foundation could be shaky, the walls flimsy, and the wiring faulty. We emphasize design to help our clients ensure a solid technology foundation to support a strategic treasury.
As we help both our corporate and financial services clients address and succeed with technology, we have some advice we'd like to leave you with. 1, the change in the solution provider world won't stop. Be aware of developments, but don't be scared off by them. 2, whether you have an existing legacy system that's not optimized and not working the way you want it to, or whether you're evaluating a TMS or ERP solution for Treasury technology, have a vision for your requirements today and tomorrow. 3, with big data coming, analytics will become the new Treasury competency. Start now by thinking about analytic frameworks and data sources. And 4, when it comes to implementing Treasury technology successfully, give yourself the best chance for that success by designing comprehensively. Be sure to send us any questions and feedback you have, and thanks for everyone who attended. Join us in January for our next Treasury technology briefing.